that work?
Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Good. Oh, yeah. Are we looking forward to another wonderful lecture? Just curious, show of hands, who was here last time? There we go. That's what I like to see. Wonderful. Wow. We're standing room only now. For those of you who don't know yet, my name is Darren St. George. I'm the Executive Director of the Southold Historical Museum, and we're thrilled to have you here today. This is a partnership that John and I, the Executive Director from the Fire Island Lighthouse, we met a couple of months ago and knew we had to do something together. This is the fruit of our labors, and we're thrilled that you're all interested as well. We have a great lecture. Beforehand, I have a little bit of housekeeping. Show of hands, I'm curious here who's here today. Is anybody a member of the Fire Island Lighthouse that came out today? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And a few who are members of Southold Historical Museum. Show of hands. Wonderful. Those numbers, both of those numbers are what we're looking to elevate throughout the course of the year. So we have a number of programs coming up, more lectures on lighthouses, other events as well. And I would just be curious, I'm going to rattle off a few dates. We have a lot going on. But I want to know if anything is interesting to you. Just if you'd be interested in attending, raise a hand. April 23rd, we have our burger and beer event. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Next time we have a lecture, I'll be sure to include an open bar. Got it? May 8th, we have this is the end of our winter series, our Lighthouse series. It's another Lighthouse lecture with Mia Sertic. She's the Executive Director of the Montauk Lighthouse, but also the Montauk Historical Society. She'll be right here. That's May 3rd. We can look forward to it. Anybody interested? Yeah, me too. I'll be here. 10 by 10, our artist exhibit has opened up, and you can participate as an artist or just as a customer. You can buy art from the local community. Has anybody done this? Anybody want a few hands there? Good. We have our annual pickleball tournament. Do I have any pickles out there? Any pickle players? Yeah, a couple. Yeah. If you haven't tried it, it's a hoot. You can come and just have a good day. We have, you know what? We have a lot of other things going on. I'm just going to say this. We have a Living History Day, which is a 2-day event all weekend with reenactors right here on campus. We have a golf tournament later in the year. We also just procured a line dancing event. Anybody interested in giving this a chance? If you're ready, maybe some line dancing, and we'll even have classes leading up to the event to get you prepared. Yes. If you're not a member, you're not going to want to miss out. Come join us. As we said, today's program would not have been possible without Fire Island Lighthouse. Thank you, Jonathan Garr, for helping to put this together. Thank you very much. We also have Kathy, who's been here today, helping us set up and get everything ready. Thank you. And of course, Angela Reich, the reason we're all here today. Wonderful author of the historical novel Shipwrecks of Hope, as well as a Fire Island docent. Additionally, she's been very generous with her time today, and 20% of all proceeds that she makes today, or for her book, is going to come back here to the local hometown of Southold and support our museum. So very generous. Thank you very much. Pick up a copy. She'll even sign it for you today, if you ask nicely. Thank you, everybody. Let me turn over the floor. Angela.
Thank you. That lovely introduction, and you have a fantastic speaking voice. You should be doing these things up here.
Oh, if I knew anything about it, I would. Thank you.
So thank you guys all for coming out. It's a beautiful, bright day. No clouds in the sky, easy to get here, so I really appreciate you all coming out. This talk is going to center on what I learned as a docent at the Fire Island Lighthouse. So today I'm going to tell you about the history of the Fire Island Light and the growth and the development of what was then known as the Lifesaving Service. So that was a shore-based volunteer system that was radically changed by one particular shipwreck, the Shipwreck of the Elizabeth, off of our shores in July of 1850. So I am a retired English teacher, and I studied literature for my college career. And here I am on the shores of Fire Island, and I start learning and studying and learning and studying, and I'm looking at all the shipwrecks that occurred. And this one shipwreck really got me for a couple of reasons. And one reason was that there was a famous female writer aboard the ship. And I was like, are you kidding me? Margaret Fuller was here on my beach involving my lighthouse. It was like I went to the 7-Eleven and I saw Elvis. So I was just totally wrapped up in this research for 5 years in order to be able to tell the story properly. I am a demon when it comes to historical accuracy. So even though this is a novel, every person in the story is an actual historical person, and all the events I portray, the historical events like other shipwrecks and all such stuff going on, is all historically accurate. So it's my pleasure to share the research journey with you. So in the novel, the reader starts out on our Long Island shores and then is swept across the Atlantic to war-torn Europe. And then you are put on the ship of the Elizabeth as it's making its return voyage to America. So the reader witnesses all these different places and all of the events and the people involved. So I'm going to address 3 basic areas. There's a lot of information though, so strap yourselves in. I'm going to have you everywhere. There's a lot of maps and a lot of details. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the reason for the building of the Fire Island Lighthouse. And the second is the inception of a shore-based life-saving system in America. And then finally, the how and the why the wreck of the Elizabeth affected the development and growth of the life-saving system. So we're going to start with our familiar home setting. I know we're all Long Islanders here, but hello.
Yes.
They just worked before. What was?
Oh, I didn't click on it. That's me. Here you go. You had more people coming in through Zoom. Oh yeah, we're also live streaming on Zoom. So hi Zoomers. But I was helping them, and now try it now. There you go.
Okay. So here we are on the Great South Bay, the location of the lighthouse. Here we go. And so we're interested in this is Fire Island, and here is the end of Jones Beach Island, and right in here is the inlet. So that's the close-up of the geographic area that we're looking at. So the next slide is going to show that inlet in more detail. Here we are. Okay. So you can see here's the Fire Island Inlet. And one of the questions I get asked often as a docent is, why did you build a lighthouse in the middle of the island? So you can see here is the location of the Fire Island Lighthouse. So the answer is that was the end of the island when the lighthouse was built. I know, isn't that interesting? So what happened? It's called littoral drift. So you know how Long Island sits into the continental United States at an angle, right? So we're down here. The Atlantic Ocean is constantly pushing westward and pushing westward and pushing westward. The current brings with it all this sand, and the sand naturally accretes. So all of this is about 5 miles, and this is what we call Robert Moses State Park. And none of it existed at the time of the building of the lighthouse. The inlet used to just go straight right in like that. I know. So let's go. I love maps. You're going to see a lot of maps today. So there's a historical map that I'm really interested in. It's a Dutch map, and it was made in 1675. There we go. The Ragaveen map from 1675. This is so cool to find all these old maps and this information. Here's the Fire Island Inlet as they had it portrayed at the time. Wow. And you can see Lange, Lange, Ieyland here, 1675. So, you know, the Dutch were here first, and they handed over New York and their area to the British. That's the Third Anglo-Dutch War. They were having wars over dominance over the shipping rights for trading, you know, the great Dutch trading companies and all that. So The agreement was that the British got New York from the Dutch, and so they surrendered New Netherland, which was New York City, to the British. So what I'm interested in when I see this is that a lot of Dutch names became anglicized over time, right? So when I saw some of these old Dutch maps, the Fire Island Inlet was called the Veer Island Inlet, V-I-E-R, Veer Island Inlet. So we can think about a lot of Dutch names that have been anglicized, right? Like the Bronx, B-R-O-N-X. It was a big farm owned by Jonas Bronck, B-R-O-N-C-K. So they used to go to the Bronx, B-R-O-N-C-K''S, and that became the Bronx. Brooklyn and Harlem were both place names in the Netherlands. B-R-E-U-K-E-L-E-N and H-A-A-R-L-E-M. And you can go on and on if you research this. It's really interesting how many place names. So for us, Fire Island was Veer, V-I-E-R Island, and Veer is Dutch German for the number 4. So let's fast forward now to where the British came and took over, and let's take a look at one of their early maps. This is the Samuel Wheeler survey map of 1789. So George Washington requested this surveyor to survey all of Long Island for him, and I just pulled out the area that we're interested in here, the inlet that we're interested in. So I'm going to read this to you. It's the Great Fear, F-I-E-R, Island Inlet, or ship's channel carrying over the bar 2 fathoms of water. Channel over the bar. And you can see in here, it's showing how to safely enter the inlet. And look at the shape of the inlet, as opposed to the first map where I showed you where Robert Moses State Park is. So here we have the Great Fear Island Inlet. And what do we have noted here? There's the Atlantic Ocean. This is East Beach, which is now called Fire Island. And then, of course, what makes logical sense is that this would be West Beach, which is now the end of Jones Beach Island, right? And then here are the Captree Islands. And these are the Fear Islands, which is the 4 islands. F-I-E-R was anglicized from the word V-I-E-R. It makes perfect sense when you think of the Bronx and Brooklyn and all that other stuff. So what do we call those the 4 islands now? That's East Fire Island, West Fire Island, Sexton Island, and Short Beach. So you can see how times and languages, we're talking about hundreds of years here, has changed. So my contention is that we have the Great Fear 4 Island Inlet was the original name. Veer was transposed to Fear, F-I-E-R, and it's easy to see how F-I-E-R becomes F-I-R-E. So there's a lot of rumors, and rumors are also always have a little leg in truth, because a lot of people say, well, Fire Island got its name because of all the poison ivy on the island that turns red in the fall, and it does. And it looks like the island's on fire. So put that in your, in that story too. And then there's that fires was set on the beach by the Native Americans to rain down the blubber, which is also true. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I'm a map person. I love maps and I love language, so I'm going with this one. So the next map shows the importance of our location. Here we have, oh darn. All right, here we have the shipping lanes that lead from Europe trying to get into New York Harbor. Oh. And can you see this little tiny red dot? Mm-hmm. That's the location of the Fire Island Lighthouse. So there was a big push to get into New York Harbor in the early 1800s. So if you look at the idea of the journey, if you left Europe under sail before the age of steam, 2 months later, the first man-made light you would see was our Fire Island light. Now, we are all Long Islanders here, and we know that the Montauk light is older. It was put into commission by George Washington. But look at the distance to the shipping lanes. Yeah. There's no way that light was reaching the shipping lanes. In fact, it was a lot of trial and error before we can get a light that reached from here to the shipping lanes. We'll talk about that in a little while. So all of a sudden, New York Harbor got really, really busy. And the importance of it is what happened was this. There you go, the opening of the Erie Canal. So the construction began here in 1817. The first boat trip from Rome to Utica, October 22nd, 1819. The 363-mile canal completed in October 20th of 1825. So how did this affect us? Well, all that good stuff in the middle part of the country, the crops, the skins, the timber, that all used to go down the Mississippi River out for international trade to New Orleans. Well, now, all of a sudden, you can get this good stuff coming down the Hudson River to New York Harbor. So New York Harbor went from being a small little sleepy harbor town into a major international port, to the point where New York Harbor was doing more than 60% of all the international business in the country. So listen, I'm saying this now, this was 1825, 1826. How old was the country at that time? Like 30-something years old, right? Washington wasn't even inaugurated until 1789. So here we are, we're trying to grow a brand new country that has no infrastructure. Now, what do you need to grow a country? You need money and you need people. And the only way you get either of those in was by ship. Cargo ships, immigrant ships, cargo ships, immigrant ships. And they were all coming in on that line that I showed you. So the importance of the Fire Island Lighthouse cannot be overstated to the growth of this country, where 60% of the international business was coming in. So the increase in all the shipping is good news, but the bad news about that is that also meant an increase in the number of shipwrecks. So the government was called upon to come up with a system of coastal safety. That meant lighthouses and a shore-based rescue system. So the next slide I'm going to show you is just a sketch I found of the building of the 1826 lighthouse. Oh, this is the lighthouse itself. So the original Fire Island Lighthouse was built in 1826, 74 feet tall. It was octagonal in shape and made of Connecticut bluestone. So the tower that now exists, when you do come and visit us, which I know will be this season, is not this tower. The tower that you will see is the 1858 tower. Why did they take down this original tower? Well, even though they had this tower in the perfect geographical position, there continued to be even more and more shipwrecks. In fact, this was the tower that was in operation during the shipwreck of the Elizabeth in 1850. Well, they realized at that point that we all know light travels in a straight line, right? At 74 feet, that focal point did not get the light out over the curvature of the earth to reach the shipping lanes. So they knew they had to take that tower down and put that focal point up higher. So this lighthouse that you will visit, the 1858 lighthouse, stands at 168 feet tall. And it does get the light out to the shipping lanes. So the next slide is the one where I have the building of this tower in 1826, a sketch that I found, and just included because it just shows how desolate Fire Island was. It was a sandbar. That was it. There was once this lighthouse was built, there were no other structures on that island except for like temporary fishermen's shacks that were used in the summertime. So it was on a completely desolate area, and there was no other way to get there but to sail or to row. So in addition to lighthouses for coastal safety, the federal government began to implement a land-based rescue service. So maritime safety was addressed by the Life-Saving Benevolent Association, and they were able to put up 10 original life-saving huts in 1848. So you can see it looks kind of like a one-car garage. And for all of Long Island, they had 10 of these. Now we know how much coastline there is, right? they didn't have the money. It was a brand new country, and just like now, you go begging the Congress for funding for this and that. This was the best that they could do at the time. The houses were equipped, so they would put their equipment in there, lock the door, and go away. It was based on volunteers to show up when there's a wreck, to go to one of these houses, get inside, take the equipment, and bring it down. So I'm doing this research, and I love to find original documentation. It's the best, right? So I found the original letters that were written to one another in order to effect this life-saving service. Guess where that's held? Queens College Library. Who would ever guess, right? I'm like, Queens College, all right, I'll go there. So I made a research appointment at Queens College Library, and what they hold is called the Seamen's Institute. And the Seamen's Institute owns all this stuff, and they house it there. So I learned this, and I just get such a tickle of language and stuff like that. So I never knew this. We just learned this at a talk that we had. So the Seamen's Institute was from Seamen's Bank for Savings. Remember Seamen's Bank for Savings? Remember the logo? It was a little sailor with the bell bottoms and hat-ons. So I learned that the Seamen's Bank for Savings was literally a savings bank for seamen. And it was chartered in 1829. I know, but it makes real sense when you think it was chartered in 1829, right? All the shipping's going crazy. And it was chartered for the benefit of sailors and their families. Why? We just said it took 2 months to cross the Atlantic, right? So these guys are on these ships for 2 months. They're coming off the ship in New York Harbor with wads of cash, and they're heading to New York for some entertainment, right?
Oh.
So savings was so smart. They put their banks up at the end of the pier, and on Wall Street and Pearl Street, right? So that some of this money at least got saved for their wives and kids at home before who knows what they did with the rest of it. So anyway, Chase Bank for what Seamen's Bank for Savings out, but the Institute is housed at Queens College Library. So let me show you what I found there. This is super cool. Look at this. This is a letter. So they took all the letters and made letter books out of them. I made a research appointment, told them what I was looking for, handled with gloves and very careful because these are original. So here's the list of 10 original stations and the equipment. The original 10, Eaton's Neck, Fisher's Island, Amagansett, Bridgehampton, Quad, Moriches, Mastic, Fire Island, Long Beach, and Barren Island. That's Coney Island. So when we say 10 minutes, but we have it in our minds because we live here, the distance between Mastic and Fire Island, the distance between Fire Island and Long Beach, these are unmanned huts that are sitting there. So you had to imagine that somebody is going to first notice that there's a shipwreck. And then secondly, they had to run around and get volunteers to go to the hut, get this stuff, and bring it down to the wreck site, which could be miles distant, right? So maybe that would even work if you're talking about Boston Harbor or Philadelphia Harbor, because you can run around and knock on doors. But there's no doors on Fire Island. There's nothing there. There's no doors to even knock on. So if a shipwreck was noticed there, first you had to sail across the bay to get to Patchogue or Bayshore or someplace to go get these people to show up. So this is a system that was set up that had a lot of potential failure points in it. Do you agree? I would think, right? Here's another letter I just have to show. I just love this stuff. So this is dated September 24th, 1849. It's written by Walter Restore Jones, who was the president of the New York Life Savings Benevolent Association. And he says, "Sir, please report to me the progress you have made in constructing the 6 boathouses you contracted to build. Very respectfully yours, Walter Restore Jones." So these are our original documentation for this life-saving service. So the next slide I'm going to show you is some of the equipment that had been stored in those life-saving huts. It's a sketch. So here we are. This is a cart into which they would put all this equipment and lug it down the beach. Here is a Lyle gun. So a Lyle gun is like a small cannon. and they would shoot that cannon out to the ship and tie with it a hawser or, oops, keep pushing the wrong button. A heavy rope would be sent out to the ship with instructions on it to attach it to the mast. So once you had the ship-to-shore contact, they would set up with a block and tackle communication between the two. What they would put on that hawser would be a breeches buoy. So a breeches buoy is a buoy with a pair of breeches sewn into it, a pair of pants, basically, short pants, so that if you climbed up the mast and you got into the breeches buoy, you didn't fall out the bottom through the middle, right? So you would sit in that and they would haul you in one at a time, like we used to haul in the laundry back in the days in our backyards, right? So in addition to that, there's a rescue boat, which was 1,000 pounds at least, and needed 8 to 10 men to transport this and to man it once it got into the water. Of course, the other part of this rescue service was the lighthouse. So we have a painting in the lighthouse, a copy of a painting that was made in 1880 that shows you some of this equipment being used. So here we are. Here's the guy in the breeches buoy. Here's the next guy waiting his turn to get in it. Here's the rest of the survivors with this ship that's stuck on a sandbar. And here's the rescue boat that wants to get out there. This is I show it to you for demonstration purposes, but normally these wrecks happen during storms, and this looks pretty settled to me right now. So I'm going to show you some pictures that are probably a little bit more realistic. Like this guy, this lucky mariner who's being rescued and in the breeches buoy, and you notice the icicles, because a lot of our nasty storms, right, they happen in the wintertime. So that's the breeches buoy in use. Here is the rescue cart being hauled along the beach. Now look at these guys, right? They're hauling this rescue cart with the Lyle gun and all the equipment in it. And again, it could be miles along the beach. I mean, I love the beach. I go all the time, and I can tell you, I take my beach chair out of the trunk of my car, and I'm tired by the time I get to the seashore. Look what these guys have to do with this equipment in this terrible condition. A lot of failure points here. Excuse me, here is a use of a rescue boat. This is more like it, going out to a ship. Excuse me. See their life vests? They're pieces of cork sewn together. The jackets they were wearing, the best they had was wax cotton. So remember, it's wintertime, it's cold, these guys are wet, you get wet, you stay wet. There was no technical clothing, no EMS at the time. Excuse me. Now, here I'm going to show you the next picture, what I like to call it's a picture of optimism. Yes. This guy is swinging on this rope. Can you imagine during this storm trying to get himself into this little rescue boat down here? And here's the next guy climbing the rigging, waiting his turn for this rescue. So, how many, shipwrecks are we actually talking about here? Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, isn't it? This is a photo I took of a map that we have at the lighthouse, and it's called Shipwrecks of Wreck Valley. So what's Wreck Valley? Wreck Valley is the South Shore of Long Island and the coast of New Jersey, Wreck Valley. It's signed by a very famous underwater archaeologist named Edward Lee Spence. He gifted it to us in like the 70s. So every name that you see, every one of these is the name of a shipwreck in Wreck Valley. So when you see this, it really gives you the impression of how many there actually were. And in fact, I would say that this map, being from the 70s, was created by scuba divers. Now we have all this equipment where you can irradiate into the sand, and I'm sure there's more wrecks than this even pictures for us. Excuse me a second. Okay. So You're saying to yourself, why the Elizabeth out of all these wrecks? Well, I explained that to you earlier because there was something about the journey and there was a lot about Margaret Fuller for me. So the Elizabeth occurred, actually, the wreck occurred on July 19th of 1850. The ship left Italy for New York Harbor on May 23rd, right? Like a 2-month journey, right? There was trouble on the Elizabeth from the start because the experienced and wonderful captain, Seth Hasty, was dead by the time they reached Gibraltar. So they didn't get very far. The poor guy died of smallpox. So the first mate, Henry Bangs, captained the ship. And he was inexperienced and he had never brought a ship into New York Harbor before. I know. And so in addition to all of that, Margaret Fuller was on board. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about Margaret Fuller. Because of her, the impact of this shipwreck was made internationally famous. So, Margaret Fuller was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1810. Her father was a Massachusetts state senator in 1813, in the House of Representatives of 1825. So he was part of the early formation of our government. I mean, imagine what it was like in their household. He's out there creating a new government for this new country. Imagine their dinner table conversation. He was a Harvard graduate, and he saw the promise in her, and he tutored her with his classical Harvard education. He made it his business to make sure she got that education. In a time when women weren't even allowed to go into a college, much less attend and even learn any of this stuff. Well, that was a blessing, but it was also very hard on her. So the blessing part was that she stood out as a female with this brilliant education, with her brilliant mind, but it was tough on her. She was, as by the age of 6, she's translating Greek and Latin literature. What little girl's going to want to play with her? They don't want to play dolls and dress up. And here she's talking about Horace and Dante and Aristotle. She was very lonely as a child for that reason and was always socially awkward for that reason. But she persisted. She grew up and wrote and lectured and taught. She was teaching children because girls were allowed education, but it was very rudimentary. But what she did was this. She had conversations for women. Now, they weren't allowed to have a higher education, but they could sign up for a conversation with Margaret Fuller in Boston. And what were they talking about? Well, she's teaching them about Horace and Aristotle and philosophy. Listen, it was a brand new country. How do we measure what's happening here against what we know about the past? You have to know these classical people and all of their literature. So she caught the attention of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. They became very close collaborators. So what made her famous outside of Boston were these two major pieces. This here is a literary magazine called The Dial. Literature, Philosophy, and Religion, quarterly. She was the first editor of the first literary magazine in America because she and Thoreau and Emerson said, you know what, we have to create a purely American literary voice. Because at that time, everybody's looking across the ocean at Europe because that's where culture came from. And they're like, no way, we have a new country here, we're going to create a uniquely American voice. Hence the literary magazine. The second thing that got her a lot of attention was Woman in the 19th Century. This is a book that she wrote that asked the question, what will a woman's role be in this new country in these robust and changing times? Well, first edition sold out. Second edition sold out. They were selling like hotcakes. So this got her bigger attention than just Boston. It got her national attention, and it caught the attention of this guy, Horace Greeley. So he was starting his brand new newspaper, the New York Tribune, in New York City. So he wrote her a letter and asked her to come down to New York and be his literary editor. So she thought about it for like 10 minutes and said, okay, I'll come to New York. So she moved to New York City. And I'm saying this in like one sentence. So she moved to New York City, right? Women who were single did not do this in 1840. It was widely frowned upon, but she didn't care. It was her business to ruffle feathers, and that's what she did. So she moved to New York City. She stayed with the Greeleys for like a month in Turtle Bay, which is now where the UN is. But that's really far from where the offices were downtown. So she decided to leave them and go get her own rooms. And she went to the Tribune to live near the Tribune office. I found this old picture of the Tribune office. Isn't that cool? I also found her address because of letters and stuff where she lived down there. But I went down to look, but it's all these buildings are gone. It's now Pace University. So I couldn't find any of it. But 1840, a woman living on her own in the city. It was not like, remember, I could see we were all about the same age, not you, but everybody else. Remember we used to watch Marlo Thomas and that girl? And she got in the middle of the street, she got her own apartment in the city, she's throwing the hat up in the air. There was no hat throwing in those days for a woman who was living on her own. So she didn't care, she did her own thing. She's working for Horace Greeley, she's writing for the paper, and she met this couple, Rebecca and Marcus Spring, and they asked her to go to Europe with them in 1848. And she said, sure, I'll go to Europe. I've not had the opportunity to go. Do you remember your history? What was going on in 1848 in Europe? It was the age of the European rebellions. France, Germany, Austrian Empire, every place. All of these people were rebelling against having kings and these royal families ruling them. Why? Because they looked across the ocean at us and said, hey, wait a minute. These people get to have representation and get to elect a president. And we've been under the thumbs of these royal families for generations and centuries. They had it. So all of these countries were rebelling, and they were chasing their royal families out. They were dethroning them. If they were smart, they would concede to a constitutional monarchy. But there was bloody rebellions everywhere. This was the age of a great shift in social consciousness. So who comes sailing into the middle of that but Margaret Fuller? Now, she got involved in the Italian Revolution of 1848. So, a lot of maps, right? Here comes another one. What was Italy like in that time period? It's not the Italy we think of today. So, in 1815, after the fall of Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna divided the continent among the nations. And this is what it did to Italy. Here's Rome. And straight across the peninsula, Rome was always under the charge of the papal, it was always the papal states under the charge of the Pope. Everything north of that was controlled by the Austrian Empire. Sardinia was controlled by France. Everything south of this, including Sicily, was considered the kingdom of the two Sicilies. It was controlled by Spain's King Ferdinand II. So the Italians were saying, what are all these people doing here? We want control of our own land. Who does that sound like to you? Margaret Fuller sat at that dining room table, right? Her father was part of the new government after we kicked out King George. So she felt the heart of what these people were trying to do, and she got involved in it. The next slide shows a picture of some of the destruction that was going on. These are pictures from Rome, where the cannonades and all this were just blasting down this ancient Roman architecture. So don't forget, there she is. She's still working for Horace Greeley. So now she's writing up the battles and writing up the cause for independence, sending it across, and it was getting published in the New York Tribune. She stayed, she witnessed the battle, she wrote, and she was pleading for America to recognize this new government. Essentially, she ended up becoming the first female war correspondent by doing all this, right? So, I want to show you some plaques that are in Italy right now that recognize Margaret Fuller's contribution to the cause. This is a plaque that's on her address where she lived in Rome. This plaque is a street named after her in Rome. And this plaque is a little building where she stayed for a short time in Rieti. So you notice the name, Margaret Fuller Ascoli, because she got involved also with an Italian marquis, whose name was Giovanni Ascoli. They got married and had a baby. So while she's doing all this stuff, she's a very busy lady. She was taking care of everything. So Margaret Fuller Ascoli lived here. That was a street named after her. And this is the house that she went to have the baby, because you don't want to have a baby in a war zone. So she went there for a few months, had the baby, left the baby there with a wet nurse, and went back to Rome to continue her work. So Margaret Fuller was internationally known and respected. Well, that revolution failed, because if you remember, the Italians didn't actually get their independence till 1861. So this was the first Italian revolution of 1848, which didn't work out. So now, you know, if you're on the losing end of a rebellion, you better beat it out of town pretty quick. So she got on the ship Elizabeth with her husband and a 2-year-old baby and left for New York Harbor. So here I am, years into this, writing, this researching, and I have 4 great histories that I've been talking to you about. The development of the lighthouse and the shore-based life-saving system, Margaret Fuller's life in America and her life in Rome, and then the European revolutions of 1848. So here comes the 4th great history that I have to tell you about, which is what exactly happened to the Elizabeth on the shores of Fire Island. So remember, trouble happened from the start when the captain died by the time they got to Gibraltar, and the first mate became the acting captain. His name was Henry Bangs, and he never captained a ship into New York Harbor. So the next slide shows you the 2 fatal errors of the captains as he came into New York Harbor. So the story contains a combination of bad luck and bad judgment. So the bad luck was that he's coming into New York Harbor, never captained a ship in there before, and what's happening? A huge hurricane was blowing up the coast. And of course, there's no forewarning of anything, right? Back in the day. Right. I followed through the storm. They didn't call them hurricanes then. They didn't like rate a hurricane or anything. They called it a blow. It was started in Baltimore. It made its way all the way up to New England. It was a huge, huge storm. It went on for days and days. And here comes this poor guy sailing into the middle of it. So that's bad luck. But there was also bad judgment involved, his inexperience. He underestimated the force of the storm. So he felt this hot wind blowing northward, and he's going, oh, goody. This is going to blow us up into New York Harbor even sooner than we expected. He got the passengers on board the deck. He explained to them how we're going to get into New York Harbor by morning. Go pack your trunks. That was a mistake. That was bad judgment. And the other bad judgment was that he misjudged his location, because he did see the light of a lighthouse flashing. So he thought he was looking at the twin lights here, Sandy Hook and Navesink Highlands. He thought he was here. So he set a course straight for that, thinking, woo, New York Harbor. But instead, which lighthouse did he see? Right. he saw the Fire Island light, and this is his actual route, and he set a course straight up and set a course for disaster, basically. So, where exactly did the Elizabeth hit our shore? Here we are, the Fire Island Inlet at the time. Here's Fire Island Light, and next to it was a life-saving hut. Here's the wreck of the Elizabeth. 5 miles away, right? Exactly the worst spot when you have these stations 10 miles apart. They hit 5 miles away from the life-saving station on a deserted island where there's no people to man the life-saving station and get the boat and the equipment out there. So I'm going to give you a little aside for a minute, okay? I made a research appointment at Harvard University because they hold the Fuller family papers. He was father was a state senator, blah, blah, blah. So I went up there saying, maybe I'll find something more in these trunks of interest. So I did, but then also when I left, I had spoken to the librarian who was ultra helpful. I got home 2 weeks later, I got an email from her saying, we made an acquisition that I think would be of interest to you. So what was the acquisition? Remember her friend was Henry David Thoreau? He came to Fire Island. He spent 5 days on Fire Island researching and trying to find any manuscripts or letters or any of her belongings. While he was there for 5 days, he interviewed all the survivors. Harvard acquired the notes he was making on all of the survivors. I know. And how nice it was that she contacted me. I was gone. I would have never known that they acquired this. So she sent me them, not the notes themselves, and I studied them. And he was on Fire Island. He interviewed all the sailors who came off the ship, because not all of them died. And they're the ones who said that the captain called everybody on board and misjudged the location. And all that stuff I just said to you is documented by Henry David Thoreau. I know, isn't that amazing? And this research, when you start digging in research, stuff starts coming back to you. It's like crazy. So that's how I'm able to picture what happened on the ship, because the eyewitnesses told Henry David Thoreau, and we have the records of that. So this was proof perfect for what happened to the Elizabeth, of how the failure points of the life-saving system were disasters. Because according to the Thoreau's notes, this wreck happened at 3 a.m. The boat got caught on the sandbar. They didn't get the rescue equipment there till noon the next day. Because of all the reasons I said. They had to go find people, bring them back. The storm was still raging. They had to drag everything down there. The wind was still so severe that the Lyle gun couldn't reach the ship. So it was of no use. There was no breeches buoy to use or any of it. So the equipment wasn't even of use. Anyway, what happens is that the newspaper wreck reports were blowing up all over the place. So normally, there's a lot of wrecks, right? I showed you the map. Usually a wreck report is like a page 3 one-liner that an insurance company would use for, for getting their insurance money back for insurance purposes. But the coverage of the Elizabeth wasn't just that. It was front page news across the nation. And again, because of research now, all these newspapers are faxed into, I follow the newspaper reports. They went on for 9 months, I'm telling you, every day, because for 3 basic reasons. One is that Margaret Fuller was lost on this ship, and they were mourning her tragic loss. She was very beloved in this country and internationally. Front page newspapers, front page for months. The second reason is that the people were railing with anger about what I call Long Islanders' bad behavior. There were about 40 people implicated in looting the wreck. Again, from the thorough records, they couldn't get the equipment out to help the people. The ship is there, foundering away. The ocean's bashing it to pieces. These Long Islanders came with their carts and wagons. Hey, it was from Italy. You get really good olive oil, you get silks, you get look. And they were picking up all this stuff on the beach while the survivors are still on the wreck. I know. So newspaper articles like these are all actual newspaper articles like crazy about how angry people were that this was happening. So what happened for me as a researcher is that I got lots of information because of this, especially the local papers, because local papers love to tell tales, right? So I got to know who all the people were who showed up, what their roles were. I was able to research them on genealogical websites, go to Riverhead, Suffolk County Historical, and all these local historical societies. I went to find their graves. That was a little cuckoo at the time. Plenty of it. It was right there. That's what you didn't go and find in there. Anyway, so basically, I was able to find out who was there to help and who was there to help themselves. So the outcry from the looting was another reason for the blow up of these newspaper articles. And finally, the last reason for the publicity was they were furious about the failure of the life-saving service. We're paying for this life-saving service and it does no good. So they were furious about it, and the extraordinary extent of the publicity of the wreck of the Elizabeth exposed the utter failure of the life-saving system at the time. It exposed the flaws and the expectations of a volunteer-based unmanned service. And that caused enough pressure on Congress to appropriate funds to have manned uniformed crews at life-saving stations. So what does that mean? What exactly was done? So the wreck happened in 1850. By 1852, the Lighthouse Board was created by Congress. Whoops. To better administrate lighthouse lightship responsibilities and correct the many deficiencies within the establishment. So it took 2 years, which was pretty quick for Congress to act, right? Yeah. And then by 1855, they increased the number of stations. So for example, on Fire Island alone, ended up with 7 stations. Before we had 10 for all of Long Island, North and South Shore, right? So now we had 7 on Fire Island alone. Forge River, Smiths Point, Bellport, Blue Point, Lone Hill, Point of Woods, Fire Island. And then by 1871, the U.S. Life-Saving Service was established. So I looked at this and I went, wait a minute, that's a lot of years between here and here, but what happened in between? Civil War, so that's kind of an interrupter, right? So what did that actually look like? I have here the report to the U.S. Treasury Department of 1873. And so what we ended up with was 32 stations on Long Island, realizing that they had to cover Long Island. So what does this coverage mean to Fire Island? This is what we ended up with. Aren't they beautiful? We had enlarged manned station houses to accommodate uniformed professional salary crews and the equipment. So these giant station houses that had bunks so that the men stayed, they had 24-hour watch with nighttime beach patrols. So that, let's just talk about Fire Island. Fire Island alone, between 1878 and 1914, the Fire Island crews aided 721 vessels and rescued over 7,000 people, just Fire Island. So wonderful that they have this protection now. So time goes on, and the U.S. Treasury is supporting 2 separate marine type services. First of all, it was supporting the revenue cutter service. So that was established by Alexander Hamilton in 1790 for the purpose of collecting import taxes. So what was that? Cuttered sailing ships were the fastest sailing ships, right? So they would man these cutter ships, and your cargo ship comes in trying to get into New York Harbor. They would stop you. They would mount your ship. They would take inventory, and you'd have to pay your import taxes. So they were paying for that, but then they were also paying for this land-based, shore-based rescue service, the U.S. Lifesaving Service. So at that point in 1915, the Treasury Department merged the Revenue Cutter Service with the U.S. Lifesaving Service to create what we now know as the Coast Guard. So to sum it all up, the pressure from the wreck of the Elizabeth, because of the sad and unnecessary loss of the beloved Margaret Fuller and her family, and the outrage because of the looting of the wreck and the utter failure of the life-saving service, the wreck of the Elizabeth exposed all the failure points of this inadequate system. So the resulting public outcry ultimately ended up increasing coastal safety, protected cargo and property, and saved many thousands of lives.
Wow.
Bad. Any questions? Yes. Thank you.
In your research, if you ever found out whether Margaret Fuller had any interactions with Mary Louise Booth?
Butte?
BOO.
Oh, Booth. No, I
was
don't
the
remember
first
ever seeing-
editor of Harper's Bazaar
Oh, but what year was that?
around the same time.
She was in Europe from 1848 onward, then died before she got back. So I don't know the years of that, but I don't know that, I don't remember seeing that name.
Yeah, her birthplace is in Japan.
Oh, no kidding. We'll have to research that. It sounds like fun.
Yeah,
Oh,
and she was friends with the Harper brothers. That's how she became.
Oh.
Editor.
publishing company, yeah, publishing family.
Yeah,
Very
very
interesting.
similar kind of story.
Yep.
Father seemed he was a teacher, but not a diplomat, but he was very instrumental in promoting her education. She read the Bible by 5.
Right, yeah,
know,
right.
which was unusual.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
So
thank you for that information. I have to look into it. It was a right hand in the back.
I'm just curious, the name came up, Sarah James Eddy. Around that time, she's from Massachusetts, and she was a woman's suffragette. All for women's rights. She also developed all the animal rescues in the state of Rhode Island.
What's the
I
last
stayed
name?
in
Spell
her
it.
home outside of Newport in Portsmouth, I believe.
Oh.
Sarah James Eddy,
EDDY? A
I believe.
lot of strong women back in those
Strong
times.
women, yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Yes?
So didn't you say that they rebuilt the lighthouse in 1858 because it wasn't high enough? Yet they saw that light.
Yes.
So they seemed like a really far distance to have seen the Fire Island Lighthouse when they were near Barnegat. So that seems, if they could see it that far, how could they have mistaken it?
It sounds like two different questions. How could they have mistaken it? Because Bangs didn't know where he was. He thought he was looking at Sandy Hook. He didn't realize how far east he was. So that's how he mistook it. But I understand your other point was they did see the light, but I don't think that they were out in the shipping lanes by then. That picture shows you that they're much closer in than the shipping lanes that were 20 miles south. That's a very good
Crashed
observation.
6 miles away also.
Sorry?
They crashed 6 miles away at Point of Woods. Mistaking it for New Jersey.
Right. It's a very good observation though. Yes?
Yeah, so the lighthouses didn't have systematic light signals then?
What do you mean by systematic?
The different kinds of flashing
Yeah,
that
they
they tell
did.
them where they were, but he didn't see it correctly.
Not probably,
Yeah. And what about the future Fire Island Lighthouse?
meaning from now? We're operational 7 days a week. Come on down and visit. We have our original lens we have in the lens building. It's the first order for nail lens. We have 1,000-watt light bulbs going on, so we have it on 24/7. We've got a great keeper's quarters with incredible history in it, a
And,
boathouse, and the lens building.
And wonderful volunteers.
And wonderful volunteers. The lens everything about it. Yeah.
Any concerns about erosion and being a
I'm gonna turn that over to Jonathan, who's our executive director.
Okay, hold on 1 sec. We're meet you, Jonathan. Let's get you mic'd up for Zoom. And I have a couple questions on Zoom that I want to share as well. There you go.
So yes, Fire Island Lighthouse, thankfully, like kind of Angela was showing, the island has grown 5.5 miles since its original location. So we're thankfully in a very good spot, our island more or less. Now, as far as sea levels, that's a concern, but, the island at least is growing.
Right, so that's the opposite problem of what Montauk has, because Montauk's on the tip and they're losing their sand, right? While we're gaining it. So often I tell guests who come, because of all this littoral drift is pushing the sand. So I say to them, if you want to go to the Hamptons and you can't afford it, just go to Field 5, because that's where the sand ends up. Any other questions? Yes.
Curious how many people were on the Elizabeth?
Okay, it was not a gigantic ship. There were 28 people aboard. The ship was a 5-year-old, 130-foot long bark that was originally made in Philadelphia. So sorry, there was 23 people on board and 15 survivors. So who died was Margaret Fuller, her husband, and her child. Horace Sumner, who was a relative of Sumner, the congressman, and 3 crew members, and the nanny that they brought aboard for to take care of the child. So there's 8 people who died out of 23. Yes.
Your drawing showed the ship within shore, within thing. I don't know if that's stylized, but your research is so in depth. I'm sure you probably know a lot more. Did you hear anything more about what happened and how you were lost as opposed to 15, say?
Well, Horace Sumner became terrified and he jumped off to try to swim in. He jumped down and never came back up again.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were others who tried to get ashore. There was only 1 life jacket aboard, and guess who owned it? Margaret Fuller. And she lent it because she knew she was never going to make it. But she lent it to a very strong swimmer, one of the crew members, and he made it aboard. And he's the guy who ended up getting to the sand and running down the beach 5 miles to the lighthouse to alert the light keeper. Yes,
Captain survived?
of course. He actually, they had records of him. You know, whatever reports he had to fill out. He got on a train from Babylon, went to New York City, probably picked up another boat in New York Harbor. I know. Yep. Anything else? Oh, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a
for
question.
John.
Here. Can I steal the microphone? Thank you. All right. So we have a question here from Zune, from Stephen. Greetings from down east Maine. The town of Southold has more lighthouses than any other town in America. I hope the Southold Historical will continue to create programs. Oh, this is starting to sound like an advertisement.
Right there.
Yeah, of course. Stephen, very good. My favorite author. He asked, what is the repair status of the Fire Island Lighthouse? I should be giving back this microphone, right?
Thanks for that.
There you go.
All right, yeah, thanks, Stephen. We are hopeful we will be restoring it in the next couple of years. The Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society is a nonprofit preservation society, just like Orange Point, and we have a partnership with the Fire Island National Seashore, and so we're working together to make it whole again and repair the minor damage. It's very minor though. The tower's still open. People can still climb every day. It's kind of like the siding of a house. Just some of that fell off. So soon enough, we hope.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked. I mean, Stephen.
Anything else?
I think we're good. Everyone, this has been an incredible turnout, a wonderful program. It takes a village. Thank you to all of our volunteers, our docents today. Thank you to our staff as well for a wonderful partnership here. Thank you.
Yes.
And of course to all of you, because we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you, everybody. We enjoyed this. All right.
Good job, you.
Thank you.
Angela already, accept. Thank you guys.
Excuse me? Sorry, one last thing. Go ahead. Oh, and pick up your copy of the book on your way out right here. You can even have it signed today. Thank you.
Do you have any,
Yes.
any snow in Southold?
Okay, I have a note here for you. Somebody wrote it. Oh, go ahead.